Hi, this is Mark from Brown Works, and today we're introducing our line of custom grips for Para Ordnance, Para USA models of double stack pistols. So today we're going to talk about the different sizes, different models, and some different things to look at when sizing up for a new pair of grips. So stay tuned, we're going to break it down and look at each of them. Okay, as you can see, we have a lot of different options here, and there's a lot of different models. So we have grips that's going to have the standard double stack, okay, and these are going to have the trigger bar, trigger bow cover, okay, and then we have grips for their LDA models, and we'll talk a little bit about that. That's their light double action pistols, which they don't need. We'll show you the frame, but they won't have the need for that little cover. So we have those different options. And generally to start out, we start out with some smooth grip option and some texture grip option. That allows you to get some texture if you want it, or if you want a smooth grip and have a logo or some pattern or something like that you want on your grips, we can accommodate that with these different grip types. And as you can see, we have all kinds of different woods or wood types available on the website. We'll talk a little bit about that. So let's just go through some of them now. Okay, Para Ordnance was founded in Canada in 1985, and they had a whole line of M1911 style semi-automatic pistols and components. They were bought by an American company, so the name changed from Para Ordnance to Para USA. I'm not quite sure when that happened, but then Para USA was bought by the Remington Outdoor Company in 2012. But that didn't, they really didn't keep this brand around. There might have been one or two models that they kept. But in 2015, the Para brand kind of ceased to exist when it was totally folded into Remington. So most of my models are the older from Para Ordnance. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the differences. Since there was such a large time span, there have been a couple minor changes throughout time that can affect some of the fit of the grips, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So basically, they have a couple different models. These three are a P14.45 model. And basically the P14 was to signify that the magazine would hold 14 rounds of 45 ACP. This is a P13.45, so it's a slightly smaller. The P14s was typical you know, the government 1911 style or size, typically a 5-inch barrel. The P13, slightly smaller. The barrels are generally about 4 1/4 inches. So this was typically to hold 13 rounds of 45 ACP. So a little bit smaller. And then you have the P12 45, holds 12 rounds. The magazine holds 12 rounds of 45 ACP. The barrel is typically about 3 1/2 inches. And then they have the P10 models. And these are, the magazines should hold around 10 rounds of 45 ACP, and the barrel is about 3 inches. This P10 is also known as the Warthog. So this one's labeled a P10, and then this one's labeled a Warthog, but they're essentially the same exact gun. We can look a little bit of some of the differences, but basically the same pistol. Okay. And we talked a little bit about, there's an LDA version of these, which is their double action. So the typical single action, there's generally a cutout here for the trigger, this trigger bow, to extend out past the frame. Okay, so single action, you have it cocked, pull the trigger, and the action of slide, cocks. Okay, so the version, an LDA version, okay, there's no cutout here because the mechanisms inside for the trigger are totally different. Okay, so this is you see that did not cock the hammer all the way back. So it is a double action, pulling the trigger. We'll cock that hammer back. Okay. Now to reset the trigger, okay, the action has to cycle. The action cycles, and then the trigger is can then be engaged for that double action motion there. Okay. So there is a difference in the frame to accommodate the trigger parts and all. Okay. Now something else you'll notice, some of the models do have a ambidextrous thumb safety. Okay, and this is one of the typical like the Colt ambidextrous safeties, where it has this little leg. This leg doesn't extend as far as the Colt because it runs into the frame here, but it's still enough here that the grip has to ride over top of it. And all of our grips, so you don't have to worry about that, all have a slight cutout to accommodate any ambidextrous safeties. Okay, so that's going to be on all of our Para Ordnance grips are going to have that, just in case you do have the ambi safety. Okay. Now something else about some of these, this is the P14, and they also made where you could buy the frame by itself, and you could put together, basically build your own 1911 with you know, your own slide, your own barrel. This one is not labeled P14. It was actually sold to me as a P13 just because it had a 13 round magazine, but that doesn't make it a P13 frame. This is actually a P14 frame because of the measurements here. So just because what the magazine has doesn't necessarily mean what it is. And unfortunately, the model numbers were only stamped, as far as I could tell, on the slides. So if you replace the slide, that kind of removed the model number markings. So a lot of different variations over the time. Some of them have different back straps here. This one's a little bit more rounded than this one. Sometimes this tail, this beaver tail, is a little bit different. This one's rounded off. The hammers sometimes can be different. Okay, that's just the matter of the amount of time and the different generations that they've gone through. I don't know all the different generations. Now this one I believe is an older, and there are some differences in the frame. These frames aren't too bad, but there is sometimes some warping in this frame. So sometimes there's a little bow here, and sometimes the gap here doesn't always line up. So sometimes one side can be a little bit higher than the other, and sometimes this curve is not always this nice angle here. Sometimes they're a little off. So this back ledge here, like I said, this back strap sometimes is a little different, and this back ledge is doesn't always measure the same from one to the other. Just something to be looking at when you're fitting grips is that the ledge difference on these may be slightly different from one gun to the other. Okay. Some other issues I've seen with some of these frames is sometimes these bushings sit a little too high. Just trying to compare these two. This one sits a couple 1/16 of an inch higher. You know, less than 1/8, but sometimes more than a 1/16 of an inch higher. And sometimes what that does is that is higher than where the actual screws would screw down on. That can cause sometimes your grips to be loose if the screws cannot screw down completely. I found on a lot of these older pistols that the screws actually have a little rubber bushing to it, a little rubber washer that helps hold everything down. If you come across that, let us know. We can send you out some of these rubber bushings if you've purchased grips from us, if you have that issue. So please let us know if you hit that issue. Okay. So let's move on to, and the P13, very similar. One of the things, the other differences that I've seen occasionally is sometimes this bevel on top is not ground down completely the same from one side to the other. So there might be, we try to accommodate the best we can, there might be a small gap at the top just because they did not ground this down all the way, or if there's some warping to the frame. Okay. All right, and then the P12. You know, like I said, it's only just a little bit smaller than the P13. Just to give you some measurements, the distance, one of the things you can do is measure from the center of the screw, the top screw, to the center of the bottom screw. And these measurements are on our website. But the P14 measures 3 1/16 of an inch gap. The P13 measures 2 11/16 of an inch gap. The P12 measures 2 3/8 of an inch gap. And then the P10 measures 2 1/64 of an inch gap between center of the top screw to center of the bottom screw. Okay. Now, Para Ordnance did have some other models. I believe they have like a P16 in a 45, or actually a 40 Smith & Wesson, which is basically the same size as the P1445. So a smaller round, you can fit more in the magazine, but the size is the same. So if you have a P16, it's typically going to, these P14 grips should fit. I believe also there are some rare P18, and I think that was in like a 9mm. I'm not 100% sure. But again, a smaller round, 18 rounds in a magazine, still fits in the size of this P1445 frame. I believe there was also a P15 in a 40 Smith & Wesson, which I believe fits, is the same size as the P1345. So if it's a P15, then the P13 grip should also fit. And again, I think when it changed to Remington, they had a Remington 1911 R1 enhanced double stack pistol, which I believe was the same as the P14. So if anybody else out there has better information, please leave us a comment. It's hard to find information on these models since the company and the website is no longer active. Now we're going to have some other videos that's going to talk more about the Warthog and the P10 and comparing those to the Rock Island Baby Rock 310. They're very similar guns, but the grips are slightly different. The screw holes are a little bit different. That's one of the other things about the P10 versus all the other models here. All the other models, they may have different heads on them, either a flat or a hex head, but they're very, very short and thick screws. These are, I guess they're referred to as the 1911 A2 screws. Now the P10 and the Warthog screws are different. They're smaller, much smaller heads, and much smaller threads. Okay, so those screws are not interchangeable. And I know with the Rock Island, Baby Rock uses the bigger screws, and the Warthogs use these smaller screws. So definitely, if you get a grip for the Warthog and try to fit it to the Rock Island, you do need to enlarge the screw holes and make it adjust them a little bit. But on other brands, we have specific grips for the Rock Island, and we'll probably also do a compare with the Rock Island high capacity 1911, which is very comparable to the P14. The size are almost the same. You do have some differences there. Again, the grips are very, very similar. But we do make specific grips for Rock Island and specific grips for the Para Ordnance. So again, if anybody has more information about Para Ordnance, would like to leave us a comment, we'd love to hear from you. I appreciate you watching, and I thank you. So bye for now.